Hi, and how are you? I'm so happy to see you, my angels, my cherubs, my friends, and colleagues. I think probably that is probably my favorite word for you is my YouTube colleagues. For years now, I've been looking at YouTube and watching just so many videos. It is a pleasant addiction, and I've been calling it the University of YouTube. If it's not on YouTube, I don't need to know it. So yes, I think you are my colleagues. So welcome once again, and I'm going to continue in talking about card meanings. I'm going through the series one brush over, and we're going to talk about basic meanings. But in other videos, we're also sort of mixing and matching and doing readings and seeing how the cards take their textbook meanings and how they interact with each other. So that is a lot of fun. I'm going to try and do a lot more of that with you. So here we have the Ace of Swords. The Ace of Swords you see here, there's a lot of different symbols that you see in here. First of all, you're going to see the number 1, the Ace. That is the beginning. That is where you find your power. That is the beginning of a journey. There is so much potential out in front of you. So that is the significance of the number 1. It's a starting point. Now, the second most obvious thing is the sword, the suit of swords. That is intellect, that your power is in the consciousness, the intellectual. I'm going to try and get the glare off my eyes here. Your consciousness. The power is in how intelligent you can be in face of any situation. It is the knowing. Sometimes various writings about the sword will also incorporate intuition with intellect, but intuition is very much a cup skill. But intuition can also be swords simply because it's something that you're doing with your mind. So yeah, intuition is something kind of in between swords and cups. We usually do keep it in the cup suit, but it will depend on where you're reading. So here you're going to make a detailed analysis of what is yet to come. This is kind of like the beginning stages, the planning stages. Here you have, again, as with all of the aces, a hand coming out of nowhere. It can be said that it is the hand of a god being, the higher self, that is offering to you the gift of the sword, but also it is yourself that can be giving you this offering, this potential. And that is indeed how I like to see it as well, because my approach with tarot tends to be a very help yourself, self-help kind of make your own way. Look to the cards to reflect the thoughts that you are generating about your life, so you can get a bird's eye view, an objective view of the problem that you wish to solve. So this is my most favorite counselor over the years. What else can I say? Mental force. Now, here's the thing. There's also, in tarot, everything is put on these traditional cards with a meaning. The current sort of decks, there are a lot of things that are symbolic, but really you don't start counting drops of, lemon drops, and you don't start counting leaves, and you don't start counting flowers around, and how many zodiac signs and how many butterflies there are, as we do with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Here, we do count these, what looks like seeds here, these lemon drops. We do talk about the wreath here and the crown. Those are 3 things I want to mention to you. And there's such a detailed analysis of these sort of things. Along with intelligence, there's also a sense with the sword that you're seeking justice, as I'm taking out my book to talk about those three things. But there's also a sense that you're seeking justice. Like, for instance, here I took out the justice card, and she, of course, sits there on her throne with the sword up in hand and her scale on the other hand. So the idea behind the sword there is that the aristocracy, those who had swords, who could forge swords because they were very expensive, the aristocracy were those who actually could have swords, and they were in the positions of power to rule by the sword and put people to death by the sword. The working class was more using other tools, sticks and knives, but certainly not something to the level of a very expensive sword. So justice is also an issue that comes up with the suit of swords. And so when you're looking at the beginning of justice, which is the Ace of Swords, you can also look that you are seeking to set up a path for justice. You are looking to balance that out. Or not to balance it out. No, balance is, sorry, I should cut that out. You are looking to begin a path that is a very just path. So, here in my very favorite, the ultimate guide to the Rider-Waite Tarot, as I've mentioned to you before. So I'm going to give you a few items here, just food for thought about some of the symbols that you may or may not have thought about. So, these 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yellow drops here in the middle, it actually does relate to the card number 6, the Lover's card, and I found it very curious the way that they wrote it. I've never really kind of related this card to the Lover's card. It doesn't seem like a very Lover's card to me, but this is what they say. The 6 drops of gold, the divine spark, the spark of consciousness, in a religious sense, the Holy Ghost with capital letters. The number 6 is also a reference to the card 6, which is the Lovers, the story of paradise lost and paradise regained. So I'm going to have to look into that reference, because although I've had this book for a number of years, I have never looked up that reference. So the nice thing is that, yes, you can put yourself in a position to guide other people about the meaning of tarot. You can teach tarot, you can walk the walk together, and you will never, ever be in a position to know absolutely everything. And I will never put myself in a position where I claim to no longer be a seeker. So that's part of my, being humble, is saying, this is very curious. I'll read it to you. I don't understand it. And maybe together, you can leave your comments below if you have some references to the Lover's card. So I think the first place to start for me will be to go into the reference of Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. And then it will probably be made more obvious. The second thing that was interesting is sort of like when we talk about shadow aspects, like if you look at things one side, you see one thing, and if you look at things from a different perspective, you see a different thing. Well, I find it very interesting, these well, they're not wreaths, but these plants that are cut here. They look at this as two different sides. So the significance is sort of twofold. And the reason why it is twofold is showing you the two different sides to the sword, because it's a double-edged sword. So here they call these things the twigs, and the negative connotation there, or aspect of it, is alienation and destruction. Why? Because you would be cutting the twigs for them to appear the way that they do on the card. The sword plunders nature. That's what they say. So the sword has cut these plants, has plundered them, and so there they are, just dangling, and the sword has sort of won over nature. The positive aspect to these two things as symbols is the elevation, the coronation, and celebration of nature through the gift of consciousness, respect for appreciation of our natural resources. So on this very same card, we can also look at it from a positive perspective and say the sword has cut these things, the nature has sort of given of itself, it's donated, and so now you can take these twigs, dress your yourself with a crown, with a wreath, and like sort of with the four of, here we go, the Four of Wands, you're dressing for celebration. There are other cards where you're dressing your head with a crown, so you're taking nature and you're dressing yourself up in celebration. So positive elevation, coronation, and celebration of nature through the gift of consciousness. Respect for and appreciation of our natural resources. So there's two aspects of the very same picture. And I think possibly if you look a little closer to the pictures, the two plants present themselves in two different ways. This one here on the side only has the leaves kind of visible on one side, and the inside here, if you see, it's very, very smooth. And this one here looks kind of ornate on both sides. So the two different twigs are appearing in two different ways. So that could be the two different aspects. And that's the thing with the RWS tarot, you do kind of really sort of tease out all sorts of different meanings with very simple symbols. The last thing I'm going to talk about here is the crown. Now, I have some limitations with the crown. The crown here, we'll just talk to you. I'll just read this to you, and you can give me some feedback as to what you say. So, of course, crown meaning, a sense of authority, crowning, like a crowning glory. So here we have the golden crown. What does it say? We see a 4-point crown. The tip of the sword makes 5, which symbolizes the quintessence, the fifth power. A spirit which heals is the quintessence of experiences that we have been through. Now, I'm sure just by reading it and you hearing it for the first time, you may have to listen to it a couple of times to sort of tease out the meaning of those words. I've worked on it a little bit, and let me tell you, the way that it's presented is a little puzzling because here it's basically saying there's 4 points to this crown, and the sword showing up on top, that little tip makes up the 5th tip to the crown. And that ends up being the 5th power. It's symbolizing of the 5th power. Now, what is the 5th power? You can look for a lot of different things on the internet, and there really is not a lot that's conclusive. It is talked about, but sometimes it's talked about more in the sense of economics and how government controls the state. Like the government will control businesses and they control enterprise and they have just ultimate control. I've looked up how the church has also been part of government and how they tend to, have a certain amount of control. Not as much these days as they did once upon a time, which would be reflected in the cards as they were made at that time. But essentially, you do have authority figures who have control over us, the minions, we the little people. The thing is that this crown having 4 different points, I don't think that the 5th point there. I mean, you can't really look at reality. If a crown was sitting on top of a sword like that, it certainly would fall through. So it's left to the imagination that you're counting that tip of the sword as a 5th point. But if you looked around to the other side of the crown, presumably there would be other points to the back of the crown, and it wouldn't just have points to the front. So I guess this crown here, you don't really see the 4th one because it's hidden behind the twig. And I find the whole, when you super analyze things like that, it gets to be rather cumbersome and you end up losing the meaning to it. So what I do is I rather it's kind of fun to sort of do mental escapades and exercises on your own. But I limit it to, it's a sign of authority, it's a sign of government, of people having control through organized sort of like a government or a business sense over other people. And there's like a head of state here. Okay, so somehow you have to cut through, and you're at the beginning stages, at the A stages, but you may end up having to cut through the BS. That's how I'm basically looking at that. Now, so I've talked about the droplets, the twigs, the crown, the sword, the hand. They also talk about, there's tons that is written about the mountains down below, and the peak. You're seeing basically peaks of mountains, and where the peak meets the sky, that is presumably where people will live, and people will live at the highest point where they can be as close to the sky as they most possibly can. That is the dwelling of man. So it really depends on where you're reading, and it's nice to be able to have newer decks that kind of omit some of the more detailed, the details that may have been more cumbersome at one time in history, and take out the meanings that we need to get through what are relevant issues in our daily lives today. So I don't really see a whole lot of people building houses on mountains these days. That's my point. Now, they also talk about the gray sky, and in different cards you are going to see gray skies. This one, for instance, the gray sky is a neutral sky. It is one that is now that speaks to the aspect of justice. Using knowledge to achieve justice, you are staying neutral. The color gray is a neutral. It's not happy, it's not dark, it is just neutral. So it's not a yellow. The skies in these cards tend to be either yellow, blue, gray, or very dark. And this is the color of neutrality. So I hope I gave you a little bit of information that doesn't duplicate necessarily the information that's already widely available on the internet, but that has been resourced, and I've given you the source of that information as well. Another source that I have consulted for, I've definitely consulted Belwen. I guess I should give it a good representation. Holistic Tarot, Belwen. But also, my absolute favorite, if you want to have a very decent beginner book, I'm a big support of not spending a lot of money until you really need to. And you will probably never need to, but when you really want to. This is a decent book. It's simple, it's versatile, it'll give you everything you need to get proficient. This and scanning the internet is all you'll need. And guess what? Joan Bunning, the author, has made this book, her book, available for free. You can read it page by page on the internet if you just type in her title, Learning the Tarot. And she, of course, I only found that after I had bought it, but I still really like having the hard copy, and it's very well used. So the nice thing is too, she gives these lovely spreads, so that the minor arcana has one, the major arcana, oops, I'm doing it backwards. This is the minor arcana, and the major arcana was the first one I showed you. And then she gives you exercises. She gives you here, for instance, here's the Hierophant, as we're talking about government and authority and organized oppression. She'll give you a sort of synopsis here so that you can form your information, and then she'll give you a description here. So that's just a brief sort of bit of what she gives you here. There's some spreads. She gives you different Celtic spreads. This is the book to start. If you want to buy one, this is a good place to start. If you want to buy two, I'd hope that this one is still available if you're interested in symbolism. You may want to really not keep to the traditional Rider-Waite deck. You may want to really sort of spread your wings and take other ones. But I think that the Rider-Waite is a good place to start. It's a place that most people do start, so that you can get the foundation, and before you move on to other decks. So there you go. That's my blurb for the Ace of Swords. Hope you enjoyed it. Please leave your comments down below, and let me know if you'd like to hear more or less of various aspects of the tarot. I'm certainly interested in your questions and seeing how I can field them. Thanks, and have a good evening.